afternoon. Once again, welcome to Mount Vernon's Facebook Live for Preservation Month. The Behind the Scaffolding, although we're sort of at the Admiring the Scaffolding from Afar edition. I'm Tom Reinhardt, Mount Vernon's Director of Preservation, and today we have a real treat for you because we're going to talk this week and next about the other parts of Mount Vernon's preservation program, not just the architectural work that's going on at the mansion. So today we're going to cover our extensive archaeology work that we've been doing in the South Grove, a little bit south and west of the mansion, and we're going to meet some of our archaeological team. So Mount Vernon's preservation program really does comprise three parts. First is archaeology, second is architecture, and third is our viewshed program. So those three components are all interrelated, and all the work that we do on each of those is all based in research and on-site work that gives us an in-depth knowledge of the entire history of this land and the land across the river from prehistoric times up until today. And we're going to touch on all of those aspects as we go on. So let's walk on over here and talk to our first crack archaeologist. Here's our archaeological crew chief. And what's your full title, Joe?
I'm the Archaeological Field Research Manager.
Field Research Manager. That research is very important for what we do here. So this is Joe Downer, and Joe's going to talk to us, give us a little tour here through our excavations that are going on over the last few years down here in the South Grove. So Joe, I see here that we've got some water features that we've uncovered. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, Tom. So out here in the South Grove, the work we've been doing here for the last 5 years has really made us revisit our interpretation of the site. And probably one of the most prominent features that we find right now, we found a number of these brick drains that are all emptying out in this area here. Most notably is this large vaulted drain here. This was built in 1775, circa 1775. And we know, because we did some other archaeology closer to the kitchen a few years ago, that this drain line actually goes of that building and was designed to run wastewater away from the building down the hill. But this isn't the only drain we have. We also have a number of other drains that are doing the same purpose. We have over here another brick drain. You can just kind of see this jumble of bricks over here. It has been cut by a couple of utility lines. And into the corner of the paint cellar right over here across the lane. So this drain would have run diagonally off of that building underground and kind of emptied out in the area right here. Finally, there's a third drain, and this one that we believe is probably the oldest one we have out here, that runs underneath of this 1775 brick drain. And the 75 drain actually is cutting this one, which tells us that this one is newer. And just goes to show that, when we do the archaeology here, we don't just dig down and find. This landscape has been constantly from the time when Native Americans were present. And so we, as archaeologists, are always getting through that, or digging through that, having to tease that out. So yeah.
So Joe, with all this activity going on in the South Grove, what do we think the South Grove was, how it functioned during the later part of Washington's lifetime?
Well, we are right on the south lane and right next to the kitchen, so this really is a high workspace here. Being in such close proximity to the kitchen and the smokehouse, there's probably a lot of animal butchering that was going on. We interpret this space as a work yard back in Washington's day. So butchering of animals, additional food preparation, because we are right by the kitchen. Lots of trash disposals happening out here as well. We do find all sorts of artifacts that I know Lily will talk about a little bit later, but broken plates, animal bones, tobacco pipes, wine bottles, all of it is kind of your everyday domestic refuse. As it's being used and discarded, it winds up in this area here.
All right, well, that sounds really exciting, Joe. Can we just take a look? This is one of my favorite features of this drain, is that in this brick, made by a mark, probably made by the brick maker. We're not really quite sure what it means, but how frequent is it to find these unusual marks in brick, Joe?
Bricks can be kind of interesting. Every once in a while we'll find a mark in it, or more often we'll actually find the fingerprints of some of the folks that are actually making the bricks. And that's always a real cool connection to the past, when you actually see the literal handprint of somebody that's kind of being revealed. revealed again today.
Quite like the fingerprints that we found up on the false windows in the mansion, the painter's fingerprints on that window sash. All right, well, thanks a lot, Joe. We're going to move over this way. So I would also like to introduce you all to Jason Burrows, who's our research archaeologist, as we wait for Ethan to slog up the sand here. So Jason, as Joe was pointing out, we have we have a long, hundreds of, if not thousands, right, tens of thousands of years of human habitation here, going back to American Indian campsites and work sites, right, all the way up to the 21st century. So could you tell us a little bit about the overarching chronology of Mount Vernon and how that manifests archaeologically?
Absolutely. Well, if you visit Mount Vernon today, and we certainly hope that you do, what you'll see is basically a picture of a plantation that looks pretty similar to the way it would have looked when George Washington passed away in 1799. Now, of course, as archaeologists and as stewards of the entire property, a little bit over 400 acres that's owned by the Mount Vernon Ladies Association, we have to take into account all of those periods of human occupation, as Tom said, that go back at least 6,000 years all the way right up to the very present, to the period of tourism that you kind of see happening around here now. So when we're kind of coming up with research questions, we have to kind of take this entire landscape and this entire progression into account. I want to show you guys a map. Hopefully you can see this fairly well through the camera. This area right here is Mansion House Farm, or the home farm, or basically what you visit today that would be considered Mount Vernon. At the end of Washington's life, he had actually developed Mount Vernon into a 5-farm agricultural enterprise, and that's represented by the different color coding here. This entire corner of modern Fairfax County was basically Mount Vernon. It was over 8,000 acres and 317 enslaved folks who worked across these 5 farms that made up the Mount Vernon enterprise. So we're stewards basically of the home farm area here, and once again we kind of have to take into account all of the traces of human activity that have happened across this 400 plus acres. And that means all the way back, all the way up to the present. So our research questions typically revolve around the development of this large plantation system here and the folks that lived on it, but we also have to think about how this came to be. Through the periods of Native American occupation up into the colonial era, we have 17th century tenant sites out here and all the way up into, you see the mansion today, the 18th century mansion that of course grew throughout the decades of the 18th century as well. So I'd like to share a recent discovery with you guys that actually kind of puts a little bit of this into perspective. And to do that, we have to kind of look over here.
So what do we have sort of stretched out on the ground here, Jason?
So all of the sand you guys are seeing is actually fill that we've put back here. This is backfill. We've excavated everywhere that looks like a beach out here, and we've used sand because it's easy to put in the ground, it's easy to take back out, and it looks different than the cultural soil layers that you guys saw with Joe over here with the drains. So this area has already been excavated, and we've actually outlined the footprint of a building that we discovered very recently, and it's a pretty big deal at Mount Vernon to discover a new structure. The last time this happened, it's been the better part of a century, right? So this is a pretty big discovery for us. And what you're looking at is about a 16 by 16 foot footprint of what would have been an earlier outbuilding. You guys can probably see the kitchen in the background there. The kitchen dates from the 1770s. And this particular building is part of an earlier system of outbuildings out here. And since I can't show you in person, I'm going to show you a couple of images. Hopefully you can see this. This doesn't look like much to the untrained eye. You guys can recognize the modern pipes and the bricks, of course. But this different soil color and texture that I'm outlining here is actually a footing for part of the structural supports that held up this timber frame building. It's partially excavated in this photo, and you can see it's a rectangle, and the soil looks very different than the area around it, and that's how we know it was backfilled. The soil was taken out, put back in sometime in probably the early to mid 18th century, and this area here that's been excavated is actually the ghost image of what was a structural timber support, a vertical support. We actually kind of followed this, or I should say we started finding more of these structural supports and started connecting the dots literally. The sand areas here, we've excavated more of these structural posts and backfilled because we had a series of storms come through and we didn't want them to be eroded. But you can see the red outline, you see Joe in the middle for scale. We found structural supports at each of these corners, and basically picture, you guys are used to seeing a timber frame building sitting on kind of a brick foundation. This is a type of technology called earth-fast building, where instead of kind of sitting this on top of a brick or a stone foundation, those structural supports, the vertical supports, are plugged directly into the ground. So there's no brick foundation here. And it was the most common style of building in the 18th century in the Chesapeake Bay region. So we've actually found those structural post supports, and we kind of connect the dots, and we get the outline that you guys are seeing over here. The other thing I want to point out in this image is, just like Joe has mentioned, we have period on top of period on top of period. If you look at the outline of the building here, and here's our 1770s drain. This building predates the drain. The drain was built on top of it, and then later on in the early 19th century, after George and Martha Washington had passed away, Mount Vernon estate passed to Washington's nephew, Bushrod Washington, where he constructed a dairy right here, and this is actually the cellar of that dairy. So we have probably mid-18th century, later 18th century, early 19th century, then of course all of the modern infrastructure, all of the pipes and supports going all over the place from the 20th century and beyond.
Well, that's pretty cool. And, you know, as you mentioned, earth-fast structures, post and ground structures were the most common type of building, the 17th and the 18th century, all the way up into the early 19th century. But a lot of them don't survive, right? Because they were in contact, the wood is in contact with the earth, and they rot away. So finding evidence of this is very fleeting. It's trace evidence, isn't it? And so for a long time, archaeologically, archaeologists didn't even know to look for these.
Absolutely.
So
it's kind of a rediscovered technology through archaeology.
Right, exactly. So it's very exciting because this is the first earth-fast building that we've ever identified here at Mount Vernon. So that's, you know, it's exciting for archaeology, it's exciting for the architecture team, and it's exciting for our interpretive team as well. Thanks a lot, Jason.
Sure.
Now we're gonna move from our outbuildings and the overall chronology of the site to maybe a bit more fragmentary discussion, bada bing, of what we find when we do archaeology. So this is Lily Carhart, and Lily is what's your official title? Right?
I'm the Archaeological Field and Lab Technician.
We've had a lot of title changes fairly recently, so I don't remember what everybody's title is. So Lily, can you tell us about what we have on this table?
Sure. So only part of archaeology is actually conducted in the field. The other half is done in the lab, where we bring all of the material uncovered outside, inside, and basically get a handle on what we have to help us understand what types of activities took place in the movements being executed, and more about life of those people that live with us. So one way we do that is actually by looking at styles of different materials. So most prominently ceramics in the 18th century. So if you can kind of see all these 4 different examples out here of plate and plate rims. Each one looks somewhat similar, but each has a different style to it. Basically we're moving from, well, now you're moving a little bit backwards in time. That's all right. So this is probably the most recent of them. It's a pearlware dish. We have creamware, which is yellowware. We have a white salt glazed stoneware, and of course Chinese porcelain. So all of these, basically by looking at different frequencies of the different types of ceramics, we're able to place certain layers of the ground in time a little bit better.
So Lily, can you tell us, say geographically, where these would have come from in the 18th century?
So the porcelain, the Chinese porcelain, also oftentimes called China, is coming from China. It goes from China through England and then to the United States. The other 3 are all from England, all produced in England in the 18th century. We also have a lot of ceramics that are coming from Germany, from other parts of Europe, but for the most part, it's coming either from England itself or through England.
And that really shows that Mount Vernon and the Washingtons were tied into that global cultural trade, right? In their time. They were certainly looking at fashions.
And moving more into the 19th century, we have a lot more American-produced ceramics appearing here as well, from Philadelphia and even here in Alexandria, well, nearby in Alexandria. But talking more specifically about the South Grove that we've been excavating, how we knew that this area is more likely used as a workyard associated with the kitchen and the other outbuildings, rather than the flowering grove of trees, which we've been sort of understanding it as for the past so many years, is by the materials that are coming out of the ground. Things like milk pans associated with the dairy, a lot of variety. That's what we have here. It would have had a spout to pour off cream. We have a variety of different animal bones. We have, I don't know what these ones are because these just came out of the ground this week. You can see on this one that there's actually a saw mark right there, that line.
So we think that then butchering is being done here in the South Grove, correct?
Absolutely. We have a pig scapula, a sheep mandible, I think, and a cow tibia, I think. All of which are representative of the most common forms of faunal remains or animal remains that we are finding in the South Grove.
And this is livestock that was raised for
here,
food.
Absolutely. We also do find evidence of or examples of wild game, so things like deer and geese, but not in the same quantities as we're finding livestock.
Mm-hmm.
But that also points that this area really was used in conjunction, or rather, they are part of the larger enslaved workforce that is here. That this is an area that they would have been those ones that are cooking, that are butchering, that are working in the dairy, working in the wash house. So we do have other artifacts that sort of represent that type of activity as well. We have thimbles. And a lot of straight pins, which I don't have examples of, that are likely from laundry areas. We also have things of personal use, like tobacco pipes. We find these quite frequently. Let's see. And most of the material we look at in large quantities. How much of one type of material do we find? And we cannot really tie that to a specific person. We can say what group of people or what category, like the cooks would have been using this or something like that. But once every so often we do find something that we are able to tie to a specific person. So this is actually a trunk plate from that says General Washington on it. We have, I think our decorative arts collection actually has one of these still attached to an actual trunk from the time period.
And these trunks were the ones that Washington purchased secondhand for use during the Revolution, during his campaigning. And in order to personalize them, he had these plates made and then placed them on top, had them attached to the lid of the trunk.
Yes.
So this is a pretty rare and exciting find.
Rare is even an understatement how unique and uncommon these are. But yes, so, and sort of a sort of unexpected element to the materials that we're finding is how much information and evidence we have of tourism here at Mount Vernon. We do know that people have visited Mount Vernon even since George Washington was alive. And we've, he made many comments about how people would visit and never leave. But we have over 1 million visitors a year, and we do find evidence of people coming and spending time here, dropping things or moving through the space. So some examples, we have a button, artillery button, I think, from the War of 1812. We have quite a few things from Civil War period, even World War I, World War II, moving forward in time. We have a lot of military objects, whether it's because it's a pilgrimage site for military personnel.
That makes a lot of sense.
Quite a bit of it, yeah. This one's actually some of my favorite. These are trolley tokens from the electric rail or electric trolley that used to run from Alexandria down to Mount Vernon. If you've ever driven here, you might remember the very large circle out in front when you enter. That was originally a trolley turnaround, where I think that ceased to run around the 1930s. So nice old things. We have lipstick tubes that we actually have that are from, I think, the 1930s or 20s. We have advertisements for these actually. Much more compact than modern things, and some of our favorites, which are toys, evidence of children being here. We have a Gumby figurine, which has sort of become our unofficial mascot over the past 20 years, I think. And we have, this is a brownie ring. So we've got Girl Scouts, we've got toys, we have Monopoly pieces, we have lots of different evidence of people not only coming to visit, but bringing their families.
Well, that's really covers a pretty long period of history that Mount Vernon has been occupied and worked and lived in and visited. So thank you very much for that really great artifactual tour of this place. So now we're going to do what we normally do, which is field some questions that are coming in across our Facebook feed.
Sure, Tom. This one is from Carol Nichols, and she wonders, how often do you get to do archaeology digs?
Well, I'll turn that over to Joe Downer. Joe, how often do you get to do archaeology digs here?
Well, there's always some project going on around here. Part of what we do, the way we usually describe this, that our department is, or our vision is part research and part mitigation. So we always have research questions about Mount Vernon, about the 18th century, about the Washingtons and the slave people, about every aspect of this plantation. But then there are also other things that drive certain projects, and those can be mitigation projects. Anytime a new fire line or a utility line needs to go in, or a new fire suppression system, all of that has an impact on the below ground resources. And so that drives us to do some more digging there, do an excavation, come up with research questions pertaining to that site, and so the two really marry together, the research and mitigation aspects.
And the work that you're doing today in the South Grove is directly related to fire suppression, and then potentially down the line to mansion stabilization and upgrades of our mansion infrastructure systems, correct?
Yep.
Yes, so this the next question.
Amy Curse asks, when you find an object, are you able to identify which objects belong to the Washingtons and which belong to their guests?
Short answer is no, unless we have that object, something like the trunk plate, which again is beyond rare. So no, we can't really distinguish if this is something that is, even if it's handled by a guest, if it's handled by being guests and slave workers, if it's from Washington or his enslaved workers either. We really don't know specifically who handled, who touched something, unless they describe their name on it.
But as a basic understanding, pretty much everything here that we find would have been handled by the enslaved staff of Mount Vernon at that time. And then there are those sites here on the estate, like the House for Families excavation, which was the cellar, the partial cellar of the earlier slave quarter. And we believe that most of the objects that were found in that excavation would have been owned directly by the enslaved community. Is that correct?
Absolutely, because it sat beneath what was their space, their domestic area. So, yes.
Excellent. Elizabeth LaRose asks, what is used to put pottery and china shards together?
It is a synthetic glue called, well, we use B72, so it's very strong and it's archival, so it's not going to degrade over time or yellow or be subject to fluctuations because of temperature or moisture or anything like that.
Excellent. Leanne Bryan asks, are any objects there prior to the 1700s? I think she's referring to the objects on the table.
Not the ones that we have here. We do have a lot of Native American artifacts, things like arrowheads or projectile points, but we didn't bring any up today, sorry.
John asks, is there a plan to build, restore any of the period buildings that you are examining?
Well, there's been a tradition here of reconstructing buildings that would have been on the landscape in 1799, but that have disappeared from the landscape. So the blacksmith shop is such an example. The 16-sided barn is another example. In fact, even over here, this last building in the south, on the south lane, which is the carriage house, that burned down in the 19th century and was reconstructed in the 1890s. But the building that Jason talked about, that square building, which we don't really have a definitive use, a function for that building historically, but we can see here the earlier, smaller form of the mansion from the 1750s with those little odd closets added. And then we have, at a 45-degree angle coming out from the corners, these 4 outbuildings. This would have been a storehouse, wash house, dairy, and the earlier kitchen. This is that building that we had staked out, that Jason talked about. Looking at the function of these buildings, it has always seemed that this southern part of the estate below, the south of the mansion, has tended to be domestic outbuildings. So, for example, the current smokehouse, wash house, kitchen is here, the current kitchen is there. So we think that the location of this square building being very similar in form to the existing smokehouse and kind of fitting in with the ties, I think that has a good chance of being a smokehouse, as it didn't have a chimney and it's located next to the kitchen, the earlier kitchen. But we really don't know that definitively, and I think that's certainly worthy of debate in future. But that building was taken off the landscape, just as these 4 buildings were, when the big reorganization of the 1770s happens to line up these buildings here and here. So these buildings all get demolished during Washington's lifetime, so they're not on the ground during 1799, so we would not rebuild or reconstruct those buildings.
All right, we have time for just a few more questions. Courtney Skinner asks, where was the trunk plate found?
Well, it was found in an excavation that was called the South Grove Midden. So about 20 feet this way in the grass over there.
Come back one more time to this.
Yeah,
here
right
we go.
here. Right here was a very large concentrated trash midden or trash pile or pit that was about 3 feet deep. It came out of there.
But what's really interesting is that, right, so this is the mansion, right?
Yep.
Like, so this is the main house, and they're throwing away their trash that close to the house, right? Which is a very foreign idea to the 21st century.
Yeah, and to tie that back in with what we've been excavating here, another very large vaulted drain ran right through that. So 18th century drain.
That's a
ran
piece
right
of it
through
right there.
Lots of water management.
And maybe one more question?
One more question. So we had someone ask if they could chat with the archaeologists on Wednesday, and we have a lot of fans who are going to be here over the next few weeks in the summer. Can you tell us what they can see when they could ask you questions?
Absolutely, and we're out in the field virtually every day, weather depending, and we're always happy to chat with visitors who come up and are curious and interested in learning what we're doing.
All right.
Come say hi.
Just don't ask them if they found dinosaur bones or gold. Those are the two winner questions that the archaeologists like to get. So anyway, so before we sign off, I'd like to thank our archaeological team for their hard work and for participating today in our Facebook Live. And I want to remind everybody that our work, all of our work, from architecture and archaeology, is funded by visitors like you and donors like you. So we always want to remind you of that. We are a private, not-for-profit, so everything we do here is based on the money that is given to us in recognition of the good work that we do. So we thank you for that. And finally, remember that the preservation tour is ongoing on Thursdays and Fridays at 1 p.m. and then again the first and third Saturdays of the month at 10 a.m. So come on out and chat with an architectural historian or myself, and chat with our archaeologists when they're out in the field as well. So from the preservation team here at George Washington's Mount Vernon, thank you again for joining us on Behind the Scaffolding.